My name is Margaret. I'm 72 years old, and if you had told me that the son I gave everything for would one day try to take everything from me, I would have called you a liar. But here I was, sitting in a cold chair at the bank, my hands trembling as my son Calvin leaned over me, pressing a pen into my fingers. His voice was low, sharp, and laced with impatience. Just sign it, Mom. It's for your own good. The papers spread out in front of me weren't just numbers and ink. They were my house, my savings, my future. My chest felt tight, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but fear held me down. Then, as if heaven itself had nudged me, the small note I had hidden slipped from my sleeve and landed on the counter. The cashier picked it up, unfolded it, and her eyes widened. She looked at me, then at Calvin. Her lips parted like she was about to say something that could change everything. But what did she see? And would she save me, or would she turn away? I wasn't always a woman who lived with fear in her own shadow. I grew up strong, in a small town in Ohio, where everyone knew your name and your business. I married young, and when my husband passed away, I was only 42. Life pushed me into roles I never asked for: mother and father, provider and protector. I raised Calvin the best way I could. I worked nights at the diner and weekends at the library, saving every dime I could scrape together. I used to believe that one day Calvin would look at me and see the sacrifices I made. I thought he would honor them. But little did I know, the child I held in my arms so many years ago would grow into the man who would try to steal the very roof over my head. It didn't happen overnight. At first, he was just a boy who wanted everything his friends had. A new pair of sneakers, a video game, money for this and that. I told myself it was normal, that kids want things. But then the tone changed. He stopped asking. He started demanding. By the time he was 21, there was already a hardness in his eyes, like money had replaced love. I noticed it most the day he brought home his girlfriend. She was younger, sharper, and she looked at me like I was in her way. That night, I watched them whispering in the living room, and when they caught me staring, Calvin just smiled, that cold smile of his. That was the first night I felt a pit in my stomach, the first time I realized the boy I loved was slipping into someone I didn't recognize. I should have listened to that pit, but I told myself it was nothing. How wrong I was. My closest friend, Helen, used to tell me, "Margaret, you need to think about the future. You've worked too hard not to have a plan." She was talking about wills, about retirement funds, about security. I didn't like the topic, but I respected her advice. One night, she came over with documents and explained what she had done for her own children. Calvin was in the next room, and I thought he wasn't listening. But the very next morning, I found papers on my kitchen table, papers that looked official, with blank spaces waiting for my name. I hadn't asked for them. When I turned, Calvin was standing there with coffee in his hand, his face calm. "It's just easier if you sign now, Mom. That way, there won't be any confusion later." His tone was casual, but the chill that ran down my back told me everything. I should have torn those papers up that day, but instead, I folded them and pushed them into a drawer. I thought hiding them would make the problem go away. But problems don't disappear when you look away. They grow teeth. At first, Calvin tried sweet persuasion. He brought flowers, cooked me dinner, and told me I was his rock. I almost believed him. But the mask didn't last long. When I refused to sign the papers, the warmth in his voice cooled into ice. He started dropping hints about my age, about how I wasn't managing the bills as well as I used to. He'd sigh when I forgot little things, even though every doctor told me my mind was sharp. Then one night, he leaned across the kitchen table, his face inches from mine, and said, "If you don't sign, Mom, you're just making things harder on yourself." That was the moment I knew this wasn't about love. This was about control. And I had just stepped into a fight I wasn't ready for. It started slowly, like a shadow creeping across my life. Calvin's voice sharpened each day, his patience thinner, his visits colder. He no longer called to ask how I was feeling, he called to ask how much was left in my savings. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But then came the bruises that no one could see. Not on my skin, but on my spirit. He spoke to me like I was already gone, like my worth was tied to what I could give him. I found myself shrinking in my own home, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of upsetting him. I used to love cooking dinner for him, sitting at the table and laughing about old times. But now, meals turned into interrogations. He asked questions about my pension, about my account balances, questions a son should never care about more than his mother's health. And one night, when I told him I didn't want to talk about money, he slammed his fist on the table so hard my cup tipped over and coffee spilled across the floor. He didn't even help me clean it up. He just stood there, breathing heavy, staring at me with eyes that didn't look like my son's anymore. I knew then that something inside him had snapped, and I was living with a stranger who carried my blood. The first real betrayal came not long after. I got a call from the bank one afternoon. The woman on the line asked me to confirm a withdrawal I had supposedly signed for. My stomach sank. I knew I hadn't been to the bank in weeks. I hurried down there, and when they showed me the paperwork, my knees nearly gave out. My name was written across the line, my handwriting copied but shaky, like a bad imitation. Calvin had forged my signature. The banker warned me gently, "You can press charges, ma'am. This is fraud." I looked at her, tears filling my eyes, but all I could whisper was, "He's my son." I walked out of that bank with my head low, clutching my purse like it could protect me. I told myself maybe it was just once, maybe he was desperate, maybe he'd never do it again. But deep down I knew better. A line had been crossed, and once it's crossed, there's no going back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt like a reminder that I was no longer safe in my own life. I wish I could say things improved, but they didn't. Calvin's girlfriend was like fuel poured on fire. She whispered in his ear, encouraged his greed, made him believe he deserved what I had worked for. I once overheard her on the phone telling someone she's old. She doesn't even need all that money. We could use it better than she can. Her words cut me deeper than a knife. I stood there in the hallway, listening to them laugh, and my heart cracked in ways I didn't think possible. The boy I raised, the man I loved, was plotting against me with someone who barely knew my name. Later that evening, I heard Calvin say, "Don't worry, babe. Once she signs, we're set." He didn't know I was just a few feet away, holding onto the wall, so I wouldn't collapse. That night, I didn't eat. I sat by my window, staring out into the dark, wondering how a mother's love could turn into her greatest weakness. I wanted to confront him, but fear kept me silent. And silence, I was learning, was the cage he wanted me trapped in. The papers came back soon after. This time, not left casually on the table, but brought in with two men in suits Calvin introduced as friends. They looked more like vultures than friends. They smiled too much, spoke too quickly, and slid documents across my kitchen table like I was some helpless old woman who didn't know better. Calvin stood behind them, arms crossed, watching me closely. I pushed the papers back and said no. The smile slipped off his face, and for the first time, I saw the anger he tried so hard to hide in public. His jaw clenched, his voice lowered. "Why are you making this harder, Mom? Don't you trust me?" My hand shook, but my voice didn't. "Not with this," I said. Their visit ended quickly, but I knew it wouldn't be the last. That's when I started writing notes. Small, secret messages about what was happening. I hid them in books, in my drawers, even in my coat pocket. I told myself, if something happens to me, at least someone might one day find the truth. But what I didn't know then was that one of those notes would become the only lifeline between me and complete ruin. It all came crashing down one night when his patience finally snapped. He cornered me in the living room, his face red with rage. "You think you can outsmart me?" he spat. "You're old. You're weak. And if you don't sign, I'll put you in a nursing home so fast you won't even have time to pack." My body went cold. The room spun around me. I stared at the boy I once held in my arms, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee, now threatening to throw me away like trash. That night, I cried harder than I had since my husband died. But when the tears dried, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let him win. The next morning, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. My hand shook as I wrote, but my message was clear. If he wanted me to sign something, I'd be ready. Only, it wouldn't be what he expected. The morning of the bank appointment, I felt like I was walking into my own funeral. Calvin strutted beside me, carrying the folder of papers like a prize he was about to claim. He had called ahead, told the staff his mother was a little forgetful and needed help with signatures. His words made me feel small, like he had already buried me under the weight of his lies. But what he didn't know was that inside the sleeve of my sweater, I carried a note. My hands shook as I touched the folded piece of paper again and again, praying for the courage to use it at the right moment. When we walked through those glass doors, my heart pounded so loud I thought everyone could hear it. He leaned down and whispered, "Don't embarrass me, Mom. Just sign." My throat was dry, but I forced myself to nod. I told myself if I could just get the note out, maybe, just maybe, someone would see me before it was too late. The bank felt colder than usual, the air stiff with the smell of paper and ink. Calvin pushed me toward the counter, his smile stretched wide as he laid the documents out in front of the cashier. He pressed the pen into my hand, his fingers firm, his eyes burning holes into me. I lowered my head, my hand trembling, and as I moved the pen toward the page, the note slipped from my sleeve and landed on the counter. My heart stopped. The cashier's hand moved quickly, almost too quickly, scooping it up. For a moment, time froze. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the words I had written with every ounce of strength I had left. "Help me. My son is trying to take everything." I held my breath, waiting to see if she'd ignore it, waiting to see if this stranger would be my last chance at salvation. The cashier's eyes darted from the note to me, then to Calvin. Her lips parted, and for a second, I thought she might call him out right there. Instead, she offered a tight smile and asked Calvin for additional identification. He frowned, confused, but handed over his license. As he turned his head, she gave me the smallest nod, so slight it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. My stomach flipped. She had seen me. She understood. Still, I couldn't let myself relax. Calvin's patience was thin, and every second that passed felt like a rope tightening around my neck. My palms were slick with sweat, and my pulse raced as if my body already knew something explosive was about to happen. I watched as the cashier pretended to study his ID longer than necessary. She whispered something to a colleague, and the man disappeared into an office. Calvin shifted in his chair, his leg bouncing, his jaw tight. "What's the hold-up?" he snapped. His voice was sharp enough to make a woman in line glance over. I stared at the floor, terrified that if I looked up, he'd see the truth written all over my face. The minutes stretched like hours, and I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. 2 police officers walking toward us, their expressions calm but serious. My breath caught in my chest. I prayed they were there for me, not for something else. But how would Calvin react when he realized the trap was closing in around him? The moment the officers reached us, the air shifted. Calvin's smile vanished as they asked him to step aside. "Is there a problem here?" one of them said gently, but the weight in his voice was undeniable. Calvin's face twisted with anger, and before I could even blink, he snatched the papers from the counter, shoving them toward me. "Just sign, Mom. Don't make this harder." His voice was louder now, drawing stares from everyone in the lobby. The officers moved quickly, one taking his arm, the other blocking his path. "Sir, you need to calm down," they warned. But Calvin yanked against their grip, his voice breaking with rage. "She's mine. It's all mine." His words sliced through the room, and for the first time, the mask he wore in public shattered completely. I sat frozen, tears filling my eyes as the people around us gasped. I couldn't believe this was my son, the boy I once sang lullabies to, now screaming like a man possessed. They cuffed him right there, his face red, his body shaking with fury. He looked at me, his eyes blazing with something between hatred and desperation. "You'll regret this," he hissed as they pulled him away. His voice echoed in my ears, haunting me even as the lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm. People whispered, the cashier squeezed my hand, and I felt my body go limp with relief. But even as the officers took him through those glass doors, I couldn't stop hearing his words. They sank into me like poison. "You'll regret this." Would I really? Or had I finally done the one thing that would save my life? Days later, the house felt empty without the sound of his footsteps. I thought I would feel only peace, but grief came in waves I wasn't ready for. I grieved for the boy he once was, for the mother I used to be, for the family I had lost long before that day at the bank. Friends visited, neighbors brought casseroles, and everyone told me I was brave. But bravery doesn't erase the ache in your chest when your own child looks at you like a stranger. The cashier called me once, just to check on me. Her voice was kind, and it reminded me that not all strangers are threats. Some become saviors. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe there was still goodness in the world, even if it didn't come from where I had hoped. And then, weeks later, the phone rang. I answered, and a voice I didn't recognize whispered on the other end. It was his girlfriend. She begged me for money, said Calvin had told her I'd help, that I owed them both. My stomach turned, but I stayed silent until she finished. Then I took a deep breath and said words I never thought I'd be strong enough to say. "No, I owe you nothing." Her silence on the other end was thick, heavy, and then the line went dead. In that moment, I knew something had shifted in me forever. I was no longer the woman who cowered under her son's shadow. I was the woman who survived him. I've learned that blood doesn't always mean love. Sometimes, family can break you in ways strangers never could. But I also learned that kindness, like the kindness of a cashier who chose to read a note instead of looking away, can rebuild the pieces you thought were gone forever. My story is not one of loss, though I lost plenty. It's a story of reclaiming myself, of finding strength in the darkest corner of betrayal. And if you're listening now, if you've ever felt trapped by the very people who should protect you, I want you to hear me. You are stronger than you think. You can stand up. You can say no. And sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is refuse to sign away the life you fought so hard to build.